Is he delusional, or is he deniable? Who he is the General. He claims to have been a deniable asset to the World Army during the Apocalypse War. Wearing parademon goggles, the General claims the World Army existed long before Steppenwolf's invasion. He has published a tell-all account on the dark web, citing a global conspiracy for both power and profit. According to him, that conspiracy consists of Tyler Chemo Robotics, Project M, and Stag Industries. The General led incarcerated supervillains to assassinate, sabotage, and destabilize politicians, companies, and petty states. Hey, what is this? Some sort of, no, I refuse to say it. Anyway, the General's campaigns against the system have been staunched by the Sentry. Intriguingly, the General remembers the Sentry as Robert Reynolds, a janitor for Tyler Chemo Robotics. Curiouser still, it was the General who somehow remembered the Sentry being erased from everyone else's memory. With new recruits, the General stormed what appeared to be just another vacant ultra-luxury high-rise. While infiltrating the Master's non-fatally incapacitated NYPD intelligence. This was much to the chagrin of the recruits. It was then Amora noticed a technological equivalent of magical illusions. And so, a presence made itself known. Clock, the AI majordomo for the Sentry's watchtower. Hospitals. Millions of life stories begin and end in hospitals. You are James Michael Starling. You awaken to an examination from Dr. Beth Chappell. You are a patient in the emergency room of McNider Memorial Hospital in Midway City. You notice Dr. Chappell is wearing AI goggles that compensate for her lack of vision. You relate to her that the goggles were crafted nearly a century ago by Tom Strong and gifted to Dr. Charles McNider, the hospital's namesake. You make Dr. Chappell's fine hairs stand up. How do you know where you are? And how are you downloading star charts into the goggles? You are informed your parents are dead. How are you unaffected by this? Furthermore, how do you know the origin of the goggles, but not know your parents were androids? Overnight, you dream of being a superhero. You dream of being Omega the Unknown, and purple androids are swarming you. It is then a cacophony jars you awake. Purple androids, like those in your dream, are crashing through every door to find you. It is then she appears, the paramedic who delivered you to McNider Memorial, Casey Brink. Simply the coolest, prettiest woman you've ever seen. She wheels you to a freight elevator and down to the garage where she whistles for her ambulance. The ambulance answers the call like a valiant steed in a western and opens its back doors. Casey assists you inside as the purple androids land atop the freight elevator, crushing it like a car crasher at a junkyard. Staring through the back door windows, you witness Dr. Chappell, in a fanciful disguise, discharge an electromagnetic pulse from her goggles, blacking out the garage lights, and rendering the purple androids non-functional. Despite the unevenness of crude backroads, you feel the ambulance ride is impossibly smooth. Casey wonders why you ask no questions. You know there is no need. And then you arrive. On a very safe street. A street lit up rather festively. What's the occasion? You. You're the occasion. Casey introduces you to a stop sign. One that reads, "Hello friend, my name is Danny." You are James Michael Starling. Your old life ended in a hospital. And in that hospital, your new life has just begun. Will Magnus had always been an insignificant drone at Tyler Chemo Robotics. However, when the firm declared competition among its metallurgists, Will was granted an euthanized father box to study its alloy. Discreetly, he noticed the box displayed slightly different coloration. This box was brighter and slightly warmer. So, what did a metallurgist do? He talked to it, and instead of continuing a vain attempt to extract an alloy sample, he fed it energy. And lo and behold, the box awoke. Bright, warm, and rippling like water. Its damaged casing cracked like an egg, and underneath was a cube. The soul of a box will described as a cosmic cube. He sat the cube near several samples of apocalyptian metals. Like alchemists of myth and legend, the cosmic cube melted, mixed, and forged a new colourful cybernetic casing. However, the casing was not cast around the cube. Will figured the cube wanted to be free. It was then the cube projected a holographic record of itself as an apparitional little girl residing somewhere called Project Pegasus in the 70s. Will admitted not knowing anything about such a project. Suddenly, checkmate agents flooded his laboratory. Will thought he had rigged a phony surveillance feed. Checkmate was ahead of him. The cube, angry and fearful, warped the bodies of the checkmate agents. Unexpectedly, the cube then shattered under the stress. It lacked enough energy to survive its actions. Frantic, yet calculating, Will absconded with the fragments. During his escape, Will rigged several machines and experiments to fail, causing a mass evacuation. Once outside, he hid at a local junkyard, where, overnight, he built himself a car, complete with salvaged license plates. Using routes and back roads, Will drove into the Adirondacks. Arriving at Mount Athena, Will discovered a decommissioned underground facility. Inside, Will met the sole remaining resident, Adrienne Brashear. She informed him the cube's name was in fact Kobik. Adrienne wept when presented with the 6 fragments. She recounted that Kobik had once been a mother box, personal property of a New Genesian. She escaped her owner and resided at the project until the Reagan administration. Will then noticed how the fragments were quivering. Adrienne explained the fragments were destabilizing. It was theorized by her father, Adam Brashear, that cosmic cubes were wired into their casings using a mechanism similar to a human's vagus nerve. Once removed, the cubes would then gradually destabilize. A slow and painful kill switch. Hurriedly, tirelessly, Will devised a new regulatory device for Kobik's fragments. He concluded that cosmic cubes could achieve stabilization only when wired into stable metals. It was then Adrienne alerted Will that checkmate agents were rifling through his car. A surveillance satellite likely noticed the vehicle near the facility. While Adrienne activated countermeasures, Will spoke to the 6 fragments. He spoke of being more than a tool, cog, or drone. He spoke of casting, not a confining casing, but a freeing armor. Will wired the 6 fragments into simple respective metals: iron, lead, gold, mercury, platinum, and tin. When checkmate descended into the facility, they were met by 6 extraordinary new heroes, the Metal Men. Did you know mercury is the only metal that is liquid at room temperature?
If you're reading this document, it means I'm either dead or have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. My name is Kate Godwin. Not long ago, I was living in San Diego. It was where I could be my true self. I loved it. But my family didn't want me joining a freak show. So, we moved to Midway City. It's midway between Columbus and the middle of nowhere. Perfectly normal America. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. Sure, my new hometown looks normal enough. But look again. A house where a robot, a mummy, and my favorite actress live. A comic shop managed by a kid and a weirdo always dressed in a costume. A museum whose tour guide talks like she lived the exhibits. And a family down the street who have bugs for pets. Perfectly normal America, right? Don't believe me? You will.
Situated across from New York, Millennium City was erected at the dawn of the 20th century. Like Civic City and Seaboard City, it was financed during President Crowley's infrastructure revolution. Crowley was a futurist whose visions included photoelectronic printing, air travel, multinational corporations, motion pictures, female suffrage, and that books would be printed, with yellow ink on purple paper. Look, not all predictions can come true. A modern Nostradamus nonetheless. It was as if Crowley was a time traveler. What a fanciful idea, right? It is said that people are one of 2 bottles. When dropped, one shatters into shards while the other becomes a jagged weapon. The agency, forerunner to checkmate. On a budget, the agency would recruit from militaries, police, prisons, and mercenaries. Why not use what is already trained in a person? Allocating different specialties meant no signature modus operandi, no pattern, no trail, no evidence of a covert agency. Very economical, very discreet. If only one person could do it all. Mark Spector could indeed. Like all agents, Mark had to design backstories for deep cover called legends. Not all legends were known by the agency. This was for purposes of both deniability and mistrust. And no agent designed a legend as concise, as detailed, as tangible as Mark Spector, even going so far as to undergo extreme cosmetic surgery.
Hi, I'm Mr. Knight. My suit is my armour. Every client is my king. Every deal is my queen. And every job is my quest.
I am Terence Sloan. I am a self-taught polymath. My IQ is exactly 200, and you are some unimaginative, lamestream normie who has only just noticed the problem I solved hours ago.
Oi! I was once Stephen Grant. My great-grandfather was half Mohawk. I was orphaned as a child and taken in by my uncle in the States. I coped with my loneliness through social media, under the handle Scoop Daily. I was once engaged to a girl named Sadie. She left me due to my awkwardness and poverty. So I began to improve myself. Gone was the chav in a tracksuit. I became Britain's first gentleman criminal, the Night Raven.
My name is Mark Shaw. I was born Mark Fletcher until my mother remarried a federal marshal. My actual father was a famous crook called the Outlaw. I guess I was always doomed to become an idealist. Too many Saturday mornings watching cartoons like The Privateer and The Star Czar. I was an assistant district attorney until the system failed me for the last time. My step-uncle then offered a life-changing opportunity. Now, I am a Shan. No man escapes the manhunters.
I'm Jake Lockley. Why you want to know so much about me? Buy a background check like everyone else. Now fuck off.
Spectre. Mark Spector. What day is it? Where am I? Last thing I remember was waking up in Egypt.
It is said that people are one of two bottles. When dropped, one shatters into shards, while the other becomes a jagged weapon. Legend has it that Mark Spector is both. 1932, New York City. It was the Great Depression, a Darwinian experiment in culling the common man and purifying the elite. Children began disappearing. The newspapers overheard whispers of such disappearances. However, the newspapers chose to overhear such matters, were being handled privately by the elite. And, of course, the newspapers chose to not overhear the cries of the common people for their lost children. Arriving in New York, Philadelphia reporter Orrin C. Evans met with a Harlem hero known as the Revenant. Like his mother, Marilyn Moonlight, Revenant was also a fist of Khonshu. Revenant told Evans a fantastically twisted tale of two-fisted weirdness. A former magic act assistant, Revenant was friends with Alice Starr, a stage assistant turned showgirl. She had been murdered, and her former boyfriend, socialite Dennis Piper, was framed. Piper was, in actuality, the modern-day Robin Hood, known as the Operative. Piper escaped execution by the cops only to discover his informant had also been murdered. He tracked down Alice's sister, a former pilot named Sarah. A squad descended upon Sarah's airfield to execute her and Piper, only for Revenant to intervene. Piper then learned that Alice had been seeing a handsome general. Upon noticing a yacht emblazoned with the name Pied Piper, the operative knew the general was, in fact, his father. General Piper was chairman of a private investment group known only as the Board. It was the Board that would slow economic recovery as it desired a business arrangement with the Nazis and Japan. After all, were Germany and Japan also not culling the common man and purifying an elite? Revenant also informed Evans of his doubts concerning where the general received his economic forecast. But more on that later. Meanwhile, in the West Virginia mining town of Dark Willow, union labor was clashing with corporate-funded police. The area was considered cursed ground since native times. However, a vein of semi-soft metal was discovered by the Stag Mining Company. During the violence between labor and police, Dr. Rupert Kingsley was often too meek to ignore police orders to let wounded strikers die. When he did find the courage to treat a union leader's wounds, the police burned Dark Willow to the ground. The fleeing townsfolk were executed as they escaped. Rupert almost burned alive while escaping his home. Although charred, he gathered what little strength he had in a vain attempt to save his mother, his crush, and some children. Although he possessed the strength of will, he lacked the strength of body. It was then his charred flesh was thrown into a nearby polluted branch. That branch had been polluted by trace amounts of the same metal being mined, eternium. Rejuvenated, Rupert arose with a madness willed to his control. The world was sick, and sickness needed to be excised by a surgeon. In New York, the operative and the revenant confronted General Piper, who sicked a squad on them. Trapped on a rooftop, the duo was rescued by Sarah Starr, now known as the rocketeering aviatrix. Across town, an archaeologist had arrived from Turkey. Lewis Green had been employed to scour the ruins of Troy to find the necklace of Achilles. Returning to New York, Green learned that his girlfriend had shacked up with a troglodytic bruiser. Hurt, Green nevertheless delivered the necklace to General Piper, who then attempted to execute him. Green escaped with the necklace. To his dismay, Green was imbued with the manly might of Achilles. How? Gargarian heritage, that's how. However, the necklace would consume a year of his life upon every use. Only spilled blood could restore, even accrue, lost years. And so, with nothing else of value in his life, Green vowed to hunt the general. That was after beating up his girlfriend's lover, of course. Talk about a Charles Atlas ad come to life. Eventually, all five would unite and learn the general was collecting children. It was then the news broke. Charles Lindbergh's son was reported missing, likely dead. Evans had been thrown out of Lindbergh's press conference due to a racist attendance policy. But not before Evans saw a nearby sickly man with murder in his eyes. And with that man, whose description matched the general's, was a raven-haired woman. Arriving where the children were being held, the mystery men were staunched by the general, now a werewolf. A raven-haired woman was alongside him to cry havoc and let slip more werewolves. Retreating, the quintet hurriedly returned to discover the children had long been moved. No two nights in the same place. Achilles figured the general's bracelet had caused his transformation. Operative revealed his father had been suffering from cancer a while. Magic made sense as to how he could appear handsome to Alice's friends. Aviatrix noticed cloth torn from a girl's clothing. Operative punched a wall. Another suspicion about his father was proven true. Despite the failure, the mystery men continued their back alley beat, patrolling for any leads. Operative and surgeon found a young Gideon Malik who ratted out the general's whole scheme. The children, including Lindbergh's, were to be sacrificed to a fear lord named Knox. The necklace was to rejuvenate the general from his cancer. The bracelet was a stopgap. But the mines. That lacked any connection to Knox. Digging up a clue from the Lindbergh child's fake grave, the mystery men descended upon the general's Zeppelin. Aerial combat ensued. With Achilles' sword, Operative beheaded his father. Aviatrix deployed her robotic guns to put down the werewolves. And Achilles unleashed his stored souls upon Knox, vanquishing her. The Zeppelin crashed in a fiery pyre. The children were extricated. However, the Lindbergh child was absent, and Knox had vanished. The mystery men buried Achilles in Micronesia, the homeland of his mother. The necklace was returned to the Gargarians. Revenant was granted retirement by Khonshu and became a famed magician on the European stage. Aviatrix invented the Argo harness and was approached by Francesca Cook. Aviatrix and Revenant even secretly married. The surgeon continued operating on society's diseased innards, and the operative inspired countless future mystery men before joining the Shan. The board scattered before its members could be identified. Legend had it. The board reorganized into the business plot, the world of tomorrow, and corporate society. But for Orrin C. Evans, the story was not over. Who was purchasing the Eternium mined from Dark Willow? Orrin would soon obtain an answer. That answer was a Nazi chrononaut aiming a Walther PP at his head. The before time, Pohnpei. Twin sorcerers, Olisichpa and Olosopa, set shore to build an altar to worship their beloved Nan Sapwe. What they erected became the megalithic Nan Madol, and so began the Saudalur dynasty. When Olisihpa succumbed to old age, Olosopa married a native and sired 12 generations. Among those generations were 16 rulers of his Dipwilap clan. The rulers demanded seasonal tribute of foodstuffs. The Saudalur became ever more gluttonous, debauched, and psychopathic. Rulers ate the fattest natives. A gluttonous queen ate her own father's liver at a banquet. The natives began to starve. In vain, the natives performed civil disobedience, theft, sabotage, and even assassination. The thunder god Nansapwe abhorred the Saudalur tyranny. The god renounced Pohnpei and settled in nearby Kosrae. There, Nansapwe impregnated a woman of his clan. The child, Isokelekele, was born to free Pohnpei. However, he lacked weapons as superior as the Saudalur. He was forced to retreat. Fortunately, the revolutionary was aided by scorned and outcast Saudalur women who led him to a cache of fantastical weapons. Once liberated, the natives pursued Saudamwol, the last Saudalur, into the ocean. Incredibly, the tyrant and his loyalists did not drown. Myth assures Saudamwol became a fish and swam away. And should we trust mythology? Well, remember, mythology is the secret that history refuses to divulge. Extra, extra, read all about it. 1938, Christmas Eve. They shivered, they were molested, they starved, they were beaten, they survived. And that was before escaping the orphanage. Tommy Tompkins was the dad, Antonio Rodriguez was the nerd, Johnny Gabrielli was the motormouth, Patrick Maguire was the scrapper, and Walter Johnson was the gadgeteer. Sleeping in junkyards by night, they sold newspapers and shared their food, blankets, and toys. They taught each other how to read, hustle, and fight. And they especially taught each other how to live. One foggy Christmas Eve in a junkyard, the boys were huddled inside an old jalopy. They had saved enough to buy a meager Christmas dinner. While munching and listening to Antonio reading a Christmas carol, the boys overheard a gangland execution. A snitch had eaten some lead, and a reporter was about to mouth some muzzle flash. Acting quickly, Antonio and Walter released the repaired parking brake. Then, down an incline the jalopy rolled, colliding with 2 of the 3 mobsters. The third pursued the fleeing reporter down a maze of stacked junkers. From there, the mobster got spooked by echoing insults. It was then a single punch rattled him. Desperate, he shot in several directions, causing bullets to ricochet. Tommy was winged while knocking the reporter aside. Fatefully, a stack of junkers fell on the mobster, snapping all the right bones. From behind the fallen stack stood the Crimson Avenger. Thankful, the masked man offered the orphans a safe home and real jobs. Once in a while, the boys would assist their benefactor as leader, Big Words, Gabby, Scrapper, and Flip, the Newsboy Legion.